The Roman legion, the most feared and effective military machine in human history, capable of conquering civilizations, building empires, and holding dominion over 3 continents for nearly 1,000 years. But what made these soldiers so utterly unstoppable that their enemies would surrender at the mere sight of their standards? And how did they transform warfare itself into a science of inevitable victory? This is the untold story of discipline, innovation, and psychological warfare that created the ultimate fighting force. But before we continue, take a second and let us know where you're listening from. Is it late at night? Are you using this to wind down or to learn something new? And if you're enjoying the story so far, like and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you the hidden truths of our past. This is that story. The year is 58 BC. A Roman messenger stumbles into the war camp of Helvetii chieftain Augetorix, his tunic torn and bloodied. The news he carries will shake the Celtic world to its core. Your army of 368,000 warriors, the messenger gasps, has been destroyed by 60,000 Romans. Augetorix stares in disbelief. The Helvetii migration had been unstoppable, a massive tide of humanity flowing across Gaul like a natural disaster. They had crushed every force that dared oppose them. Roman merchants had fled at their approach. Even seasoned Gallic warriors spoke their name in whispers. And now, Julius Caesar's legions had not just stopped them, they had annihilated them. But here's what no one expected. This wasn't luck. It wasn't superior numbers or better weapons. What happened at Bibracte that day was the result of a military system so advanced, so perfectly engineered for victory, that it turned warfare itself into a predictable science. The Roman legion wasn't just an army. It was a machine designed to consume civilizations. For over 7 centuries, from the hills of central Italy to the deserts of Mesopotamia, this machine would prove unstoppable. It would conquer Egypt, destroy Carthage, crush the Greek phalanx, and bring the Germanic tribes to their knees. It would build roads through mountains, siege engines that could topple any wall, and create soldiers so disciplined they could march in perfect formation, while enemy arrows darkened the sky above them. Archaeological evidence from sites across the former Roman Empire reveals the true scope of their dominance. At Alesia, Caesar's engineers built 11 miles of fortifications in just 3 weeks. At Masada, the 10th Legion constructed a massive earthen ramp up a sheer cliff face to reach a fortress that was supposed to be impregnable. In Britain, Hadrian's Wall still stands as testimony to Roman engineering prowess, stretching 73 miles across the entire width of northern England. But the most shocking discovery came in 1997, when archaeologists uncovered mass graves near the site of ancient Bibracte. Carbon dating confirmed these were Helvetii casualties from Caesar's campaign. The forensic evidence revealed something extraordinary about Roman battlefield tactics that historians had never fully understood. The wounds weren't random. They showed a systematic, almost surgical precision. The Romans hadn't just won through superior discipline. They had weaponized psychology, engineering, and human behavior itself. This wasn't warfare as the ancient world knew it. This was something entirely new. But how did a small Italian city-state develop such devastating military technology? What transformed Roman farmers into the most feared soldiers on earth? And why did this seemingly perfect system eventually collapse? The answers lie buried in the forgotten details of Roman military manuals, the personal letters of legionnaires, and the archaeological remains of their training camps. What emerges is a story more complex and more terrifying than any Hollywood epic, because the Roman legion's true power wasn't in their swords or their shields. It was in their minds. Tribune Marcus Flavius stands before 300 new recruits in the training camp at Vindobona, modern-day Vienna. It's 112 AD, and these young men have just taken the sacred oath that will transform them from civilians into something else entirely, something that barely resembles human. "You are no longer individuals," Flavius declares, his voice cutting through the morning mist. "You are organs in a body, cogs in a machine, and machines do not think. They do not fear. They do not break." What happened next would have seemed impossible to any other army in the ancient world. For the next 6 months, these recruits would be systematically stripped of their individual identities and rebuilt from the ground up. They would march 25 miles a day in full equipment weighing 60 pounds. They would practice sword drills until their hands bled, then practice more. They would learn to build camps, construct siege engines, and perform battlefield surgery on their wounded comrades. But here's what no one expected. The physical training was just the beginning. Roman military psychologists, though they didn't use that term, had discovered something revolutionary about human behaviour under extreme stress. They understood that courage wasn't a natural trait, it could be manufactured. The Epitome Rei Militaris, a 4th century Roman military manual, reveals their methods in disturbing detail. New recruits were subjected to controlled terror. They were forced to fight with wooden swords against seasoned veterans who showed no mercy. They were made to sleep in formation, eat in formation, and even relieve themselves in formation. Individual identity was systematically destroyed and replaced with group consciousness. Archaeological excavations at Roman training camps across Europe have uncovered evidence of this psychological conditioning. At Carnuntum in Austria, researchers found barracks designed with no private spaces whatsoever. Soldiers ate, slept, and lived in groups of 8 called contubernium. Privacy was not just discouraged, it was architecturally impossible. But the most chilling discovery came from analysis of Roman military correspondence found at Vindolanda near Hadrian's Wall. These letters, preserved in waterlogged soil for nearly 2,000 years, reveal how thoroughly the system worked. "I no longer dream of home," writes a legionnaire named Lucius to his brother. "When I close my eyes, I see only the formation. I hear only the commands. Yesterday, we crucified 300 rebels, and I felt nothing. Is this what we have become?" The answer was yes, and it was intentional. Roman military doctrine recognized that normal human beings cannot function effectively in the chaos of ancient warfare. The sight of disemboweled comrades, the screams of dying enemies, the terror of facing a cavalry charge. These things break the human mind. So the Romans decided to break it first, then rebuild it according to their specifications. They created soldiers who could watch their closest friends die and continue fighting, who could march through ankle-deep mud mixed with blood and human remains without breaking formation, who could execute prisoners, enslave children, and burn cities without hesitation or remorse. Modern military psychologists studying Roman training methods have identified techniques that wouldn't be out of place in a contemporary special forces program. Sleep deprivation, stress inoculation, systematic desensitization to violence, and what we now call unit cohesion training. But there was something else, something darker. The Romans had discovered that soldiers fight hardest not for abstract concepts like glory or country, but for the men standing beside them. So they engineered artificial brotherhood. They created family bonds between strangers, then used those bonds as weapons. A legionnaire would die before letting down his contubernum, not because he was brave, but because he had been psychologically conditioned to value group survival over individual survival. The shame of cowardice was literally worse than death. This system produced soldiers of almost supernatural effectiveness. At the Battle of Watling Street in 60 AD, 10,000 Roman legionnaires defeated an army of 230,000 Britons. The casualty ratio was so lopsided that modern historians initially dismissed the accounts as propaganda. But archaeological evidence from the battlefield confirms the impossible numbers. The Romans hadn't just created better soldiers. They had created a new species of human being, one designed specifically for war. But this transformation came with a terrible price, and that price would eventually destroy the very empire it was designed to protect. Because when you create monsters to fight your enemies, what happens when the enemies are gone? The Gladius Hispaniensis measures exactly 24 inches from pommel to point. In the hands of a trained legionnaire, it becomes something far more deadly than a mere sword. It becomes a surgical instrument designed for one purpose: killing human beings as efficiently as possible. But here's what separates the Roman military mind from every other ancient civilization. They didn't just create weapons, they created weapon systems. Every piece of Roman military equipment was designed to work in perfect harmony with every other piece. The gladius was short, because legionnaires fought in tight formation, where long swords would be useless. The scutum shield wasn't just defensive, it was an offensive weapon designed to punch and disorient enemies before the gladius finished them. The pilum javelin had a soft iron neck that bent on impact, making it impossible for enemies to throw back, while simultaneously rendering their shields useless. The lorica segmentata armour provided maximum protection while allowing complete freedom of movement. Archaeological analysis of Roman military equipment found at sites like Calcriessa, where Varus lost 3 legions, in the Teutoburg forest, reveals the sophisticated metallurgy behind these weapons. The gladius blade was constructed using a technique called pattern welding, creating steel that was both flexible and incredibly sharp. Chemical analysis shows the iron was imported from specific mines in Spain, chosen for its superior carbon content. But the real innovation wasn't in individual weapons, it was in how they were used together. A Roman sentry, 80 men arranged in 8 ranks of 10, was essentially a killing machine with interchangeable parts. When the front rank became exhausted or casualties mounted, the second rank would step forward seamlessly. The wounded would be evacuated, fresh men would fill the gaps, and the machine would continue operating without interruption. Roman military manuals describe this process with mechanical precision. When the hastati have thrown their pila and drawn their gladii, writes Vegetius in the De Re Militari, they advance to within sword's reach. If they cannot break the enemy line, they fall back through the gaps between the principes, who then advance to take their place. This wasn't warfare as other ancient peoples understood it. This was industrial scale killing. The psychological effect on enemies was devastating. Imagine facing a Roman legion in battle. You see 80 men in perfect formation approaching your position. You kill 10 of them. 20 more step forward to take their place. You kill those. 20 more appear. The machine never stops, never wavers, never shows fear or uncertainty. Your warriors, no matter how brave, are individuals. They have names, families, personal fears and motivations. When they die, their friends mourn. When they're wounded, others hesitate. The Romans had eliminated these human weaknesses. But here's where things get truly disturbing. Recent archaeological discoveries at Roman military hospitals, called valetudinaria, reveal the extent to which they had systematized even death and injury. At the fortress of Novae, in modern Bulgaria, excavations uncovered a military hospital with surgical instruments that wouldn't look out of place in a modern operating room. Bone saws, forceps, scalpels, and even primitive anesthetics made from opium and wine. The Romans had industrialized battlefield medicine. Wounded legionnaires weren't just patched up and sent home. They were repaired and returned to service. The machine maintained itself. Analysis of skeletal remains from Roman military cemeteries shows evidence of multiple healed battle wounds on individual soldiers. These men had been wounded, treated, and returned to combat repeatedly. Some skeletons show evidence of 5 or 6 separate battle injuries, all healed. The Romans had created soldiers who were literally difficult to kill permanently. But the most chilling innovation was their approach to siege warfare. When other armies encountered a fortified city, they might lay siege for months or years, hoping to starve the defenders into submission. The Romans had no such patience. They had systematized the destruction of cities. Roman siege engineers could construct massive earthworks, battering rams, siege towers, and catapults with assembly line efficiency. At the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the historian Josephus describes Roman engineering corps building a siege wall around the entire city in just 3 days. The wall was 4 miles long and included 13 fortified camps. It was constructed by soldiers who had never seen Jerusalem before, working from standardized plans that could be adapted to any terrain. This wasn't just military engineering, this was the mechanization of conquest itself. But there was something even more terrifying about the Roman approach to warfare, something that separated them from every other ancient military force. They had learned to weaponize time itself. The siege of Alesia begins at dawn on September the 15th, 52 BC. Vercingetorix, the greatest warrior king Gaul has ever produced, stands atop the walls of his mountain fortress and watches something that defies comprehension. In the valley below, 60,000 Roman soldiers are building 2 complete sets of fortifications simultaneously. One set faces inward toward the city, the other faces outward toward the Gallic relief army approaching from the east. Caesar is preparing to fight a war on 2 fronts while conducting a siege, and he's doing it with the calm efficiency of a man organizing a dinner party. "This is impossible," Vercingetorix whispers to his war council. "No army can sustain such an operation." He's wrong, and in 6 weeks he'll surrender unconditionally to prove it. But here's what made the Roman approach to warfare so psychologically devastating. They had mastered something no other ancient army understood: the weaponization of inevitability. Other armies fought battles. Romans engineered outcomes. The archaeological evidence from Alesia, excavated by French archaeologists beginning in 1861, reveals the staggering scope of Roman military engineering. Caesar's double walls, called circumvallation and contravallation, stretched for 11 miles through mountainous terrain. They included ditches 15 feet deep, sharpened stakes called cipi, wolf pits filled with iron spikes, and a water-filled moat designed to prevent undermining. The entire system was constructed in 23 days by soldiers who were also maintaining a siege, foraging for supplies, and fighting off constant Gallic attacks. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the engineering, it was the mathematics. Roman military planners had calculated exactly how long Alesia's food supplies would last. They knew precisely when the relief army would arrive. They had predetermined the optimal positioning for every ballista, every catapult, every archer. The outcome wasn't in doubt. It was a mathematical certainty. Caesar's Commentari de Bello Gallico describes the siege with the detached precision of an engineering report. On the 7th day, the enemy attempted a sortie from the eastern gate. Our 4th cohort, positioned according to plan, repelled the attack with minimal casualties. Enemy losses, approximately 400. Roman losses, 12 wounded, none killed. This wasn't the boastful exaggeration, typical of ancient military accounts. Modern archaeological analysis of the battlefield confirms Caesar's numbers with disturbing accuracy. The Romans had turned warfare into accounting, but the psychological warfare was even more sophisticated than the engineering. Caesar allowed Gallic messengers to enter and leave Alesia freely during the first weeks of the siege. This wasn't mercy, it was calculated terror. Those messengers carried word of Roman preparations to every Gallic tribe within 200 miles. They described the impossible scale of Roman engineering, the mechanical precision of Roman soldiers, the inevitable doom approaching their greatest hero. By the time the relief army arrived, its warriors were already psychologically defeated. Plutarch, writing a century later, describes the effect. The Gauls came not as an army of liberation, but as mourners attending a funeral. They had seen what Rome could accomplish, and they knew that resistance was merely a choice between quick death and slow death. This psychological warfare extended far beyond individual battles. The Romans had developed what modern military theorists would recognize as strategic psychological operations. When a city surrendered without resistance, it was often spared completely. When a city resisted, it was destroyed so thoroughly that archaeologists still struggle to locate some of them. The message was clear. Cooperation brings prosperity, resistance brings obliteration. But here's where the Roman system reveals its true genius. They didn't just defeat enemies, they converted them. Auxiliary units made up of former enemies became some of Rome's most effective troops. Germanic cavalry, Balearic slingers, Cretan archers, Syrian mounted archers. The Romans identified the military strengths of each culture they conquered, then incorporated those strengths into their own system. They had created a military machine that grew stronger by consuming its enemies. The Notitia Dignitatum, a 4th century administrative document, lists over 150 different auxiliary unit types serving in the Roman army. Each represented a conquered people whose military traditions had been absorbed into the Roman war machine. But this assimilation process reveals something darker about Roman military psychology. They didn't just defeat other cultures, they erased them. A Germanic warrior who joined a Roman auxiliary unit would be given a Roman name, Roman equipment, Roman training, and Roman loyalty. Within a generation, his sons would think of themselves as Romans first, Germans second. Within 2 generations, they would have forgotten they were ever German at all. The Romans had weaponized cultural extinction, and yet this same system that made them seemingly invincible also contained the seeds of their eventual destruction. Because when you build a machine designed to consume civilizations, what happens when you run out of civilizations to consume? The answer would emerge in the 3rd century AD, when the Roman military machine finally turned on itself. Tribune Gaius Marcellus receives the message at his headquarters in Mogontiacum, modern-day Mainz, on a fog-shrouded morning in March, 235 AD. The news is impossible, unthinkable. Emperor Alexander Severus is dead, murdered by his own soldiers near the Rhine frontier. The Praetorian Guard has auctioned the imperial throne to the highest bidder. 3 different men now claim to be Emperor of Rome. Marcellus stares at the dispatch with growing horror, not because of the political chaos, though that's terrifying enough, but because of what it means for the machine he serves. For the first time in its 700-year history, the Roman military system has no clear enemy to fight, and a machine designed for conquest is beginning to consume itself. The crisis of the 3rd century, as historians now call it, reveals the fatal flaw hidden within Rome's perfect military system. They had created soldiers so effective at destroying enemies that when enemies became scarce, they turned their skills on each other. Between 235 and 284 AD, the Roman Empire had 50 emperors. Most died violent deaths. Many were killed by their own troops. The military machine that had conquered the known world was tearing itself apart with mechanical efficiency. But here's what makes this period so fascinating to military historians. Even while destroying itself, the Roman system continued to function with terrifying effectiveness. Archaeological evidence from frontier fortifications built during the crisis shows no decline in engineering quality or tactical sophistication. Roman armies were simultaneously fighting civil wars, barbarian invasions, and Persian attacks while maintaining discipline and operational effectiveness that other civilizations couldn't match in peacetime. The machine was broken, but it was still a machine. Personal letters discovered at Roman military sites from this period reveal the psychological toll of serving in a system without clear purpose. A centurion named Marcus Aurelius Valerius writes to his wife from a fort on the Danube frontier, "We have defeated the Alemanni, the Franks, and the Goths. We have built walls that will stand for 1,000 years. We have created peace through superior firepower, but peace is not what we were designed for. We are wolves trained to hunt, and now there are no more sheep, so we hunt each other." The Roman military system had created a fundamental paradox. Success bred the conditions for failure. As Roman legions conquered territory, they established peace and prosperity in those regions. Peaceful, prosperous provinces required fewer soldiers. Fewer soldiers meant reduced military budgets. Reduced budgets meant restless, unemployed veterans with military skills and no legitimate outlet for using them. The solution historically had been to find new enemies, but by the 3rd century, Rome had reached the practical limits of expansion. The Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine were too poor to be worth conquering. The Sahara Desert blocked southward expansion. The Atlantic Ocean prevented westward expansion. The Parthian Empire in the east was too strong to defeat decisively. Rome had run out of worlds to conquer. Modern military sociologists studying the Roman crisis have identified what they call imperial overstretch syndrome. Military systems designed for expansion become unstable when expansion stops. Soldiers trained for conquest become restless in peacetime. Military budgets optimized for aggressive warfare become unsustainable in defensive postures. The Romans had created the ultimate military machine, but they had never designed an off switch. The psychological profiles of 3rd century emperors reveal men trapped by the system they inherited. Maximinus Thrax, who ruled from 235 to 238 AD, was a career soldier promoted through the ranks by military merit. He understood warfare perfectly, but he had no training in governance, diplomacy, or economic management. His solution to every problem was military. Tax rebellion in Africa, send the legions. Grain shortage in Egypt, requisition supplies at sword point. Political opposition in the Senate, execute the opposition. The machine was applying military solutions to civilian problems with predictably catastrophic results. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Even as the Roman Empire was collapsing into chaos, the Roman military system was evolving, adapting, learning. 4th century military manuals show innovations that wouldn't be seen again until the early modern period. Combined arms tactics integrating infantry, cavalry, and artillery, specialized units for siege warfare, mountain fighting, and amphibious operations. Logistic systems capable of supplying armies across continental distances. The machine was upgrading itself, even as it was self-destructing. Archaeological excavations at late Roman military sites reveal equipment and fortifications of extraordinary sophistication. The fortress at Deutz, across the Rhine from Cologne, included heated barracks, running water, and sanitation systems superior to anything available to civilian populations. Roman soldiers in the 4th century lived better than most people would live until the 19th century. But this technological advancement came at a terrible cost. The military system was consuming an ever larger share of imperial resources. By the late 3rd century, military expenses accounted for over 70% of the imperial budget. The machine had become too expensive to operate, yet it was also too dangerous to shut down, because the Roman military system had created something unprecedented in human history. A professional warrior class with the skills and organization to overthrow any government that tried to control it. The emperors were prisoners of their own army, and that army was about to face its greatest test. The morning mist clings to the Milvian Bridge as Constantine's army approaches Rome on October 27th, 312 AD. According to his biographer Eusebius, the emperor sees something in the sky that will change the course of human history. A cross of light bearing the inscription "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign you will conquer. That night, Christ himself appears to Constantine in a dream, commanding him to place the Christian symbol on his soldiers' shields. The next day, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine's army destroys the forces of Maxentius. The last pagan emperor of Rome drowns in the Tiber River. Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. It's one of the most famous stories in Western civilization. It's also, according to recent archaeological and historical analysis, almost certainly false. But here's what makes this lie so fascinating. It reveals how the Roman military machine had evolved to weaponize belief itself. The real story of Constantine's conversion is far more complex and far more disturbing than the traditional account suggests. Modern historians analysing contemporary sources have discovered that Constantine's vision was actually a calculated political strategy designed to solve a specific military problem. The Roman army of the early 4th century was no longer the disciplined machine of earlier centuries. Centuries of civil war had fractured the old system of loyalty and unit cohesion. Soldiers served for pay, not patriotism. They switched sides based on who offered better terms, not ideological commitment. Constantine needed something more powerful than money to bind his troops together. He needed a cause that transcended individual self-interest. Christianity provided that cause, but Constantine's use of Christian symbolism wasn't driven by religious conviction. Archaeological evidence from his reign shows continued pagan imagery on imperial coins and monuments years after his supposed conversion. The famous Chi-Rho symbol that appeared on his soldiers' shields was actually a modification of existing Roman military insignia. Constantine had simply rebranded the Roman war machine with Christian imagery. The Edict of Milan issued in 313 AD, is often portrayed as a declaration of religious freedom, but analysis of the document's language reveals something more cynical. Constantine wasn't embracing Christianity out of spiritual conviction. He was co-opting it for military purposes. Christian communities throughout the empire had developed something the Roman military desperately needed: unshakable loyalty to a cause greater than themselves. Christians would die rather than betray their faith. They maintained discipline and unit cohesion even under extreme persecution. Constantine recognized these qualities as militarily valuable. Personal letters from Christian soldiers serving in Constantine's army, discovered in Egyptian papyrus collections, reveal how thoroughly the emperor exploited religious devotion for military ends. A soldier named Aurelius Gaius writes to his bishop, "The emperor tells us we fight for Christ, but we fight with the same weapons, use the same tactics, and kill the same enemies as before. The only difference is the symbol on our shields. Are we Christian soldiers, or are we simply soldiers with Christian decorations?" The question reveals the fundamental transformation occurring within the Roman military system. The machine was learning to use ideology as a weapon. This innovation proved devastatingly effective. Constantine's Christian legions displayed a fanatical devotion that hadn't been seen in Roman armies for centuries. They fought with the conviction that death in battle guaranteed eternal salvation. They maintained discipline under conditions that would have broken earlier units. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. Constantine's military use of Christianity established a template that would be copied by rulers throughout history: the weaponization of religious belief for political and military purposes. The Council of Nicaea, convened by Constantine in 325 AD, is traditionally viewed as a theological gathering designed to resolve doctrinal disputes. But analysis of the council's proceedings reveals a more sinister purpose. Constantine was standardizing Christian belief to make it more useful as a military tool. The Nicene Creed wasn't just a statement of faith. It was a loyalty oath designed to identify and eliminate Christians whose beliefs might conflict with imperial policy. The emperor was creating a state religion optimized for military obedience. Archaeological excavations at Roman military sites from Constantine's reign show the systematic replacement of traditional pagan symbols with Christian imagery. But the underlying structure of Roman military culture remained unchanged. Soldiers still took oaths of absolute obedience to the emperor. They still underwent the same brutal training. They still used the same weapons and tactics. They still showed the same mechanical efficiency in destroying enemies. The machine had simply updated its operating system. But this religious transformation created new problems. Christian theology included concepts like mercy, forgiveness, and the sanctity of human life. These ideas were fundamentally incompatible with the ruthless efficiency that made Roman legions effective. How do you maintain a killing machine when your soldiers believe killing is sinful? Constantine's solution was theological innovation. Christian scholars working under imperial patronage developed new doctrines that reconciled military service with Christian faith. The concept of just war allowed Christians to kill in service of righteous causes. The doctrine of divine right made the emperor God's representative on earth, making obedience to imperial commands a religious duty. Christianity was systematically modified to serve military purposes. But this theological engineering came with unintended consequences. By making Christianity the official religion of the empire, Constantine had given his enemies a powerful weapon to use against him. Any rival who could claim to be more Christian than the emperor could potentially turn the army against him. The machine had acquired a new vulnerability, and that vulnerability would soon be exploited by the most unlikely enemy Rome had ever faced. The letter arrives at the imperial palace in Ravenna on a humid August morning in 408 AD. Emperor Honorius breaks the wax seal with trembling fingers, already knowing the news will be catastrophic. The dispatch is from Stilicho, his greatest general, commanding the last effective Roman army in the west. Alaric has crossed the Alps, the message reads. His Visigothic army numbers 40,000 warriors. They move with discipline I have never seen in barbarians. They use Roman tactics, Roman equipment, Roman siege techniques. It is as if they have learned to turn our own weapons against us. Honorius sets down the letter and stares out the window at the marshes surrounding his capital. For the first time in 8 centuries, a barbarian army is marching on Rome itself. And the most terrifying part isn't their numbers or their weapons. It's that their leader was trained by Rome itself. Alaric I, king of the Visigoths, is the ultimate product of Roman military education. Born around 370 AD in what is now Romania, he was recruited into the Roman army as a young man and rose through the ranks to become a senior officer. He learned Roman tactics, Roman logistics, Roman engineering, and Roman psychology. Then he used that knowledge to destroy the system that created him. But here's what makes Alaric's story so fascinating to military historians. He didn't defeat Rome through superior numbers or better weapons. He defeated Rome by understanding the machine better than its own operators. The Roman military system of the late 4th century had become dependent on barbarian auxiliaries. Germanic, Gothic and Hunnic warriors made up over half of most Roman armies. These men were trained in Roman methods, equipped with Roman weapons, and led by Roman officers. But they were never fully integrated into Roman society. They remained outsiders, tolerated but not trusted, used but not valued. Alaric recognized this as a fatal weakness. Contemporary accounts describe his recruitment methods with grudging admiration. Rather than simply raiding Roman territory, Alaric systematically recruited disaffected barbarian soldiers from Roman auxiliary units. He offered them something Rome never had, true equality and a share in the spoils of victory. The historian Zosimus writes, Alaric's army grew not through conquest but through conversion. Roman-trained barbarians abandoned their eagles and flocked to his dragon banners, bringing with them all the military secrets of the empire. By 408 AD, Alaric commanded an army that was essentially a Roman legion with barbarian leadership. His soldiers used Roman formations, Roman siege techniques, and Roman logistics, but they fought with a motivation that Roman armies had lost, the promise of a better future. The psychological impact on Roman forces was devastating. How do you fight an enemy who knows all your tactics, speaks your language, and is led by someone who learned warfare in your own military academies? Archaeological evidence from Alaric's campaigns reveals the sophistication of his military operations. At the siege of Rome in 408 AD, Visigothic engineers constructed siege works that matched Roman standards. Chemical analysis of arrowheads found at the site shows they were manufactured using Roman metallurgical techniques. Alaric had created a mirror image of Roman military power, but his true genius lay in understanding Roman political psychology. Rather than simply attacking Rome, he negotiated. He demanded not destruction, but integration. He wanted official recognition as a Roman general, regular pay for his troops, and permanent settlement rights in Roman territory. He was offering to become part of the system rather than destroy it. This put Roman leadership in an impossible position. Accepting Alaric's demands would legitimize barbarian military power within the empire. Rejecting them meant continued warfare against an enemy who understood Roman weaknesses better than most Romans. The correspondence between Honorius and his advisors, preserved in the Theodosian Code, reveals the depth of their dilemma. "We cannot fight him," writes the Praetorian prefect Olympius, "because he knows our methods too well. We cannot negotiate with him because it would encourage every barbarian leader to make similar demands." The Roman machine had created its own perfect enemy, but Alaric's greatest innovation wasn't military. It was ideological. He had learned to weaponize Roman values against Rome itself. When he besieged Rome in 409 AD, Alaric didn't present himself as a barbarian destroyer. He claimed to be restoring Roman virtue. His propaganda, recorded by contemporary historians, portrayed him as a true defender of Roman traditions against corrupt imperial leadership. He accused Honorius of betraying Roman military values, of relying on foreign mercenaries instead of citizen soldiers, of abandoning the frontier defences that had protected the empire for centuries. The most disturbing part was that he was largely correct. Modern analysis of late Roman military organisation shows a system in advanced decay. Professional legions had been replaced by barbarian foederati. Roman citizens avoided military service through tax payments. The old traditions of discipline and unit cohesion had been abandoned in favour of expedient, short-term solutions. Alaric was attacking a Roman Empire that was no longer meaningfully Roman. When Rome finally fell to his forces on August 24th, 410 AD, the sack was conducted with almost surgical precision. Alaric's troops targeted government buildings, military installations, and the homes of imperial officials. They spared churches, hospitals, and civilian neighbourhoods. It was the most civilized barbarian conquest in history. But here's the most chilling aspect of Alaric's victory. He had proven that the Roman military system could be defeated by someone who understood it completely. The machine's greatest strength, its systematic approach to warfare, had become its greatest vulnerability. Other barbarian leaders were watching and learning. Within 50 years, the Western Roman Empire would cease to exist, not because it was conquered by superior enemies, but because its own military system had been reverse-engineered and turned against it. The machine had taught its enemies how to destroy it. The messenger stumbles into the throne room at Ravenna, his clothes torn and bloodied from a desperate ride across war-torn Italy. The date is September 4th, 476 AD. The news he carries will mark the end of an empire that has dominated the world for over 1,000 years. Odoacer has deposed Romulus Augustulus, he gasps. The last emperor of the West has abdicated. The Germanic chieftain now rules Italy in his own name. But here's what makes this moment so remarkable. The Roman military machine didn't die in a climactic battle. It didn't collapse under barbarian assault. It simply stopped working. Like a complex piece of machinery that had been running for centuries, the Roman system had finally worn out its own mechanisms. The final decades of the Western Roman Empire reveal a military organisation trapped by its own success. The machine that had conquered the Mediterranean world had become too complex, too expensive, and too dependent on the very enemies it was designed to defeat. Archaeological evidence from late Roman military sites tells a story of systematic decline. At the fortress of Bona, modern-day Bonn, excavations reveal buildings that were abandoned in the mid-5th century and never reoccupied. Equipment caches contain weapons of declining quality. Coin hoards show irregular pay for garrison troops. The machine was literally falling apart. But the most revealing evidence comes from the Notitia Dignitatum, an administrative document from around 400 AD that lists every military unit in the Roman Empire. Analysis of this document reveals the true scope of Roman military decay. Of the 150 legions listed in the Notitia, fewer than 30 were at full strength. Most existed only on paper, their names maintained for bureaucratic purposes, while their actual soldiers had been reassigned, disbanded, or simply deserted. The Roman army had become a bureaucratic fiction. Personal accounts from the period reveal the human cost of this systematic collapse. A letter from a Roman officer named Syagrius, discovered in a monastery archive in Gaul, describes the final years with heartbreaking clarity. We maintain the forms without the substance. We drill soldiers who will never fight. We garrison forts that protect nothing. We serve an empire that exists only in the memories of old men. The machine still moves, but it no longer serves any purpose. The fundamental problem was mathematical. The Roman military system required constant expansion to remain economically viable. Conquest provided slaves, tribute, and new territory to support the cost of the legions. But by the 4th century, there were no more profitable conquests available. The machine had consumed all available fuel. Modern economic historians have calculated that maintaining the late Roman army required approximately 70% of imperial tax revenue. This created a vicious cycle. Higher taxes to support the military led to economic decline, which reduced tax revenue, which required even higher taxes. The system was economically unsustainable, but the Romans couldn't simply disband their armies. The military machine had become the only thing holding the empire together. Without legions to enforce tax collection, suppress rebellions, and defend the frontiers, the empire would collapse immediately. They were trapped by their own creation. The solution, attempted by emperors from Constantine to Majorian, was to replace expensive Roman legions with cheaper barbarian foederati. Germanic, Hunnic, and Sarmatian warriors would defend Roman territory in exchange for land grants and periodic payments. This policy worked in the short term. Barbarian armies were effective fighters and cost far less than traditional legions. But it created a new problem. The Roman military system was no longer Roman. By 450 AD, most Roman armies were commanded by barbarian generals, staffed with barbarian soldiers, and fighting according to barbarian tactical doctrines. The machine had been completely rebuilt with foreign parts. The final irony came when these Romanized barbarians realized they no longer needed Roman political authority. Why serve an emperor in distant Ravenna when you could rule directly? Odoacer's deposition of Romulus Augustulus wasn't a conquest. It was a corporate takeover. The Germanic chieftain had been serving as a Roman general, commanding Roman troops, defending Roman territory. When he decided to rule in his own name instead of the emperor's, nothing actually changed except the paperwork. The machine continued operating under new management. But here's what makes the fall of Rome so relevant to modern military thinking. The Roman system didn't fail because of external enemies or internal corruption. It failed because it had solved its original problem too completely. The Roman legion was designed to conquer and control territory. It accomplished this mission so effectively that it eliminated the conditions that made its existence necessary. Success bred obsolescence. Modern military analysts studying the Roman collapse have identified what they call victory syndrome. Military organizations optimized for specific threats become vulnerable when those threats disappear. The skills, structures, and mindset that ensure victory in one context become liabilities in another. The Roman machine had been designed to fight the enemies of the 3rd century BC. By the 5th century AD, those enemies no longer existed, but the machine couldn't adapt quickly enough to address new challenges. Archaeological excavations at Visigothic, Ostrogothic, and Frankish sites from the 6th century show these successor kingdoms using Roman military techniques, Roman administrative methods, and even Roman legal codes. The barbarians hadn't destroyed Roman civilization. They had inherited it. The machine had successfully converted its enemies into its successors. In a sense, the Roman military system never really died. It evolved. The Byzantine Empire continued Roman military traditions in the East for another 1,000 years. The Holy Roman Empire claimed Roman legitimacy in Central Europe. Modern military organizations, from the United States Army to the French Foreign Legion, trace their institutional lineage back to Roman models. The machine had achieved a kind of immortality through replication. But the original Roman legion, the unstoppable force that had conquered the Mediterranean world, had finally met its match, not in barbarian warriors or Persian armies, but in the inexorable logic of its own success. The machine that ate the world had finally consumed itself. Lieutenant Colonel David Hackworth stands in the jungle of South Vietnam, staring at a sight that would have been familiar to any Roman centurion. His soldiers, members of the 4th Battalion, 39th Infantry Regiment, are constructing a fortified fire base using techniques that haven't changed fundamentally in 2,000 years. Interlocking fields of fire, defensive positions arranged in depth, supply lines protected by fortified checkpoints. The year is 1969, but the principles are pure Roman legion. We're still fighting the same war, Hackworth writes in his memoir About Face. Different weapons, different uniforms, same problems. How do you maintain discipline under fire? How do you keep soldiers motivated when they can't see the enemy? How do you build an army that can function in any environment against any threat? The questions that obsessed Roman military theorists 2 millennia ago remain central to modern warfare. But here's what makes the Roman influence on contemporary military thinking so fascinating. It's not just about tactics or organization, it's about the fundamental psychology of professional warfare. Modern military academies from West Point to Sandhurst still teach Roman case studies. Not because ancient battles are directly relevant to contemporary conflicts, but because the Romans solved problems that remain unsolved today. How do you create soldiers who will follow orders under extreme stress? How do you maintain unit cohesion when individual soldiers are terrified? How do you build loyalty to abstract concepts like duty and honour? The Roman answers to these questions form the foundation of modern military psychology. Analysis of training programs at elite military units reveals techniques that would be immediately recognizable to a Roman drill instructor. Sleep deprivation to break down individual resistance, stress inoculation to prepare soldiers for combat conditions, group punishment to build unit solidarity. The United States Marine Corps motto Semper Fidelis, always faithful, is lifted directly from Roman military tradition. The concept of unit integrity, maintaining the same soldiers together through multiple deployments, comes from the Roman contubernium system. Even modern military architecture shows Roman influence. The Pentagon's 5-sided design was inspired by Roman castra layouts. Forward operating bases in Afghanistan and Iraq use defensive principles developed by Roman military engineers. But the most profound Roman influence on modern warfare is conceptual. The idea that military force should be systematic, predictable, and scalable. Before Rome, armies were essentially armed mobs led by charismatic warriors. Victory depended on individual heroism, favourable terrain, or divine intervention. The Romans created the first military system based on engineering principles rather than personal courage. This conceptual revolution underlies every aspect of contemporary military thinking. Modern logistics systems trace their origins to Roman supply chains that could feed armies across continental distances. Contemporary intelligence gathering uses methods pioneered by Roman scouts and spies. Even military medicine follows protocols first developed in Roman field hospitals. But here's where the Roman legacy becomes problematic. The same systematic approach that made Roman legions unstoppable also created the conditions for their eventual collapse. Military historians studying the American experience in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan have identified patterns that mirror the late Roman Empire. Overwhelming technological superiority, systematic destruction of enemy forces, inability to convert military victory into political stability. The machine works perfectly for its designed purpose. But what happens when that purpose becomes obsolete? Contemporary military analysts have coined the term Roman syndrome to describe military organizations that become too successful for their own good. Superior firepower and technological advantage can win battles while losing wars. The parallels are disturbing. Like late Roman armies, modern Western militaries rely heavily on foreign auxiliaries. Private military contractors, local militias, and allied forces provide capabilities that national armies can't or won't maintain. Like Rome, contemporary military powers face enemies who have learned to use their own techniques against them. Insurgent groups in Iraq and Afghanistan use improvised explosive devices that apply Roman engineering principles to modern materials. The machine's own methods are being reverse engineered by its opponents. But perhaps the most chilling parallel is economic. Modern military systems require enormous resources to maintain technological superiority. The United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. This level of military expenditure is sustainable only as long as the economic benefits of military dominance exceed its costs. When that equation changes, the machine becomes a liability rather than an asset. Recent studies by defense economists suggest that advanced military systems may be approaching the same unsustainability crisis that destroyed the late Roman Empire. The cost of maintaining technological superiority is growing faster than the economic benefits it provides. The machine may be pricing itself out of existence, yet abandoning military superiority isn't a realistic option for contemporary powers any more than it was for Rome. Military weakness invites aggression. Reduced defense spending creates vulnerabilities that enemies will exploit. Modern military planners are trapped by the same logic that ensnared their Roman predecessors. The solution, according to some military theorists, is to learn from Roman mistakes rather than simply copying Roman successes. This means developing military systems that can adapt to changing conditions rather than optimizing for specific threats. It means creating machines that can evolve rather than machines that simply consume. But whether contemporary military organizations can achieve this adaptability remains an open question. The institutional momentum of successful military systems makes change extremely difficult. The Roman legion was the most effective military organisation in human history. It was also a dead end. Its very perfection made adaptation impossible. Modern military systems face the same challenge. How do you improve on something that already works perfectly? How do you change a machine that has never failed? The answer may determine whether contemporary military powers follow Rome's path to greatness and collapse, or find a different route to lasting security. The machine is still running, but for how long? The old Roman road stretches across the English countryside, its stones worn smooth by 2 millennia of weather and traffic. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a military archaeologist from Oxford University, kneels beside a section of ancient pavement near Hadrian's Wall, carefully brushing soil from a bronze artifact. It's a military diploma, a discharge certificate issued to an auxiliary soldier named Marcus Ulpius Longinus in 123 AD. The inscription is still legible: served with honour for 25 years, granted citizenship for faithful service to Rome. As she reads the Latin text, Dr. Mitchell realises she's holding something extraordinary, not just an ancient document, but a direct link to the machine that shaped our world. This soldier, she explains to her graduate students, represents something unprecedented in human history. He was part of a military system so effective that its influence is still visible everywhere around us. Our laws, our languages, our cities, even our concept of citizenship, all bear the imprint of Roman military organisation. The diploma in her hands tells a story that extends far beyond ancient warfare. Marcus Ulpius Longinus was probably born in Germania, recruited into a Roman auxiliary unit as a teenager, and spent his adult life defending a frontier he had never seen before. When he retired, he became a Roman citizen with legal rights that wouldn't be matched in most of the world until the 18th century. He was a product of the machine, but he was also proof that the machine could create as well as destroy. Modern analysis of Roman military records reveals the staggering scope of this transformation. Over the course of 5 centuries, the Roman army recruited, trained, and ultimately granted citizenship to millions of men from across Europe, Africa, and Asia. They took Germanic farmers, Celtic warriors, North African horsemen, and Syrian archers, and turned them into Romans. Not just in name, but in culture, language, and identity. The machine had become a mechanism for creating civilization itself. But here's what makes the Roman legacy so complex. The same system that spread literacy, law, and urban culture across 3 continents also enslaved millions, destroyed hundreds of cultures, and created patterns of military dominance that persist to this day. Archaeological evidence from Roman military sites tells both stories simultaneously. At Vindolanda, near Hadrian's Wall, excavations have uncovered letters from Roman soldiers that reveal remarkable cultural diversity. Messages written in Latin, Celtic, Germanic, and even Arabic scripts, all found in the same military compound. The Roman army was history's first truly multicultural institution, but it achieved this multiculturalism through conquest and forced assimilation. The machine created unity through violence. Contemporary military organizations still grapple with this fundamental contradiction. How do you build inclusive institutions based on systems designed for domination? How do you promote peace through organizations optimized for war? The questions that defined Roman military culture remain central to modern defense policy. Recent scholarship has revealed the extent to which Roman military innovations continue to shape contemporary life. The concept of standard operating procedures, now fundamental to everything from airline safety to medical practice, originated in Roman military manuals. The idea of professional education, training individuals for specialized roles through systematic instruction, was pioneered in Roman military schools. Modern universities, hospitals, and corporations all use organizational models first developed by Roman military engineers. Even contemporary urban planning reflects Roman military influence. Cities from London to Cologne still follow street patterns laid out by Roman military engineers 2,000 years ago. The machine's blueprints became the foundation for Western civilization. But perhaps the most profound Roman legacy is conceptual. The idea that human organizations can be systematically improved through rational analysis and institutional learning. Before Rome, military effectiveness depended on individual charisma, cultural tradition, or divine favor. The Romans created the first evidence-based approach to warfare. They studied what worked, discarded what didn't, and continuously refined their methods based on empirical results. This scientific approach to military organization became the template for all subsequent institutional development in the Western world. Modern business schools teach Roman military case studies not because ancient battles are relevant to contemporary commerce, but because the Romans pioneered systematic approaches to leadership, logistics, and organizational management that remain applicable today. The machine's operating principles transcended their original military context. Yet the Roman example also provides a warning. Systems optimized for specific purposes become vulnerable when those purposes change. The more perfectly a machine is designed for particular conditions, the less capable it becomes of adapting to new circumstances. The Roman legion was the ultimate expression of ancient military technology, but its very perfection made evolution impossible. When the conditions that created the legion changed, the system couldn't adapt quickly enough to survive. Contemporary institutions face the same challenge. In an era of rapid technological and social change, the organizations most likely to survive are those capable of continuous adaptation rather than optimal performance. The lesson of Rome isn't that military power is inherently destructive, or that systematic organization inevitably leads to collapse. It's that success creates its own challenges, and the price of survival is eternal vigilance against the complacency that success breeds. Dr. Mitchell carefully places the bronze diploma in a protective case, knowing it will be studied by scholars for generations to come. The artifact represents more than just one soldier's service record. It's evidence of humanity's first successful attempt to create institutions that could transcend individual lifespans and cultural boundaries. The Roman legion was mortal, but the ideas it embodied proved immortal. As the sun sets over Hadrian's Wall, the ancient stones seem to glow with their own inner light. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of marching feet echoes across the moors. Not the ghosts of Roman soldiers, but the endless procession of human institutions built on foundations the legions laid. The machine is gone, but its legacy marches on, shaping our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. In the end, perhaps that's the most remarkable thing about the Roman legion. It wasn't just unstoppable in its own time. It became unstoppable across time itself, influencing human civilization long after the last eagle had fallen and the final fortress had crumbled into dust. The machine that ate the world had become the world itself, and somewhere in the growing darkness, the eternal legion continues its march through history, invisible but indestructible, carrying the hopes and fears of every generation that has tried to build something permanent in an impermanent world. The story ends where it began, with the simple recognition that some human achievements transcend their creators. The Roman legion was one of them, and its influence on our lives continues, as relentless and unstoppable as the legions themselves once were.